The shower steam hung thick in the air as Captain Elena Rodriguez dried her long black hair, tried to ignore the pointed whispers echoing off the concrete walls. At 26, she stood barely 5'3", her petite frame often mistaken for weakness by those who didn't know better. The elite Army Ranger training facility in Fort Benning had become her second home over the past 4 months, though she wouldn't exactly call the environment welcoming. "Look who's taking her sweet time again," came the familiar voice of Sergeant Rachel Manning, a 6-foot blonde from Texas who never missed an opportunity to make Elena's life difficult. Maybe if she spent less time primping and more time actually training, she wouldn't be dead last in every exercise. Elena continued toweling off, her movements deliberate and calm. She had learned long ago that reacting to every provocation only fueled the fire. Around her, 8 other women in various stages of undress either joined the mockery or pretended not to hear. The latter group wasn't necessarily more sympathetic. They just understood that staying neutral was safer. "Seriously, though," added Corporal Amy Blackwood, a muscular redhead from Chicago, "how did someone like her even make it through the initial screening? She looks like she belongs in an office pushing papers, not crawling through mud with combat gear." Staff Sergeant Nicole Hayes, the unofficial leader of their training squad, stepped closer to Elena. At 29, Nicole commanded respect through a combination of natural leadership ability and sheer physical presence. She had never been openly hostile toward Elena, but her silence during these encounters spoke volumes about her true opinions. "Rodriguez," Nicole said, her voice carrying the authority that made lesser soldiers snap to attention. "The instructors have been asking questions about your performance lately. Word is you're barely meeting minimum standards across the board. Some people are wondering if you're really cut out for this program." Elena folded her towel neatly and placed it in her gear bag before responding. When she finally looked up, her dark eyes held a steadiness that seemed incongruous with her slight frame. "I appreciate the concern," she said quietly, "but I'm exactly where I need to be." Rachel snorted with laughter. "Right, because barely passing is exactly where elite soldiers aspire to be. Face it, Rodriguez, you're taking up a slot that should go to someone who actually belongs here." The conversation was interrupted by the harsh sound of whistles echoing throughout the facility. Emergency assembly was being called, which meant everyone needed to be in full gear and formation within 5 minutes. The women quickly finished dressing and rushed toward the training grounds, but the tension from the shower confrontation lingered in the air like smoke. Outside, Drill Sergeant First Class Marcus Thompson stood before the assembled trainees, his weathered face showing the kind of intensity that made even experienced soldiers nervous. Thompson had seen combat in 3 different theaters and had trained some of the most elite warriors in the American military. His reputation for breaking down recruits who didn't belong was legendary. "Listen up," Thompson barked, his voice cutting through the morning air like a blade. "Intelligence has reached us that there's been a significant security breach at this facility. Classified training materials have been accessed without authorization, and sensitive operational data may have been compromised." A murmur ran through the assembled group. Security breaches at elite military training facilities were rare and extremely serious. The implications for national security could be catastrophic if the wrong information fell into enemy hands. Thompson continued, "Until further notice, this facility is under complete lockdown. No one enters or leaves without direct authorization from base command. Military police will be conducting thorough investigations of all personnel, and I mean all personnel. If you got nothing to hide, you've got nothing to worry about." Elena felt a chill that had nothing to do with the morning temperature. After 4 months of careful observation and meticulous intelligence gathering, the investigation she had been conducting was about to intersect with her cover identity in ways that could prove extremely complicated. As the formation dispersed and trainees headed toward their scheduled activities, Nicole fell into step beside Elena. "This security breach thing has everyone spooked," she said conversationally. "Makes you wonder who you can really trust around here." "Trust is earned," Elena replied carefully, "not given freely." Nicole studied her with sharp blue eyes. "Spoken like someone who's had trust issues before. Makes me curious about your background, Rodriguez. For someone who claims to be just another trainee, you sometimes sound like you've got more experience than you let on. Before Elena could respond, Rachel and Amy joined their conversation, creating a small group walking toward the obstacle course training area. Speaking of backgrounds, Rachel said with a grin that didn't reach her eyes, I was looking through the trainee roster last night, trying to learn more about my fellow soldiers. Your service record is surprisingly thin, Rodriguez. Most of us have detailed histories of previous assignments, commendations, specialized training. Yours reads like someone just invented it last week. Elena's pulse quickened, but her expression remained neutral. Not everyone's career follows the same path, she said simply. Amy nodded with mock understanding. True, but most careers in the military leave some kind of paper trail. Yours seems to have more gaps than actual information, almost like someone sanitized your record for a specific reason. The group had reached the obstacle course, but instead of beginning their training, they stood in a loose circle, with Elena increasingly feeling like prey surrounded by predators. The morning sun was climbing higher, but the shadows seemed to be closing in around her. Nicole crossed her arms, her posture shifting from casual conversation to formal interrogation. You know what I think, Rodriguez? I think you're not who you claim to be. I think there's something about your presence here that doesn't add up, and now with the security breach happening, I'm starting to wonder if there's a connection. That's a serious accusation, Elena said, her voice carrying a warning that none of the women recognized. Rachel stepped closer, invading Elena's personal space in a clear challenge. It's not an accusation, it's an observation. And here's another observation. You perform just well enough to avoid failing, but never well enough to excel. That's not how real soldiers approach training. That's how someone who's trying to maintain a cover story approaches training. The confrontation was drawing attention from other trainees in the area. Elena could see curious faces turning toward their group, sensing the building tension even if they couldn't hear the specific words being exchanged. Amy joined Rachel in closing the circle around Elena. So here's what's going to happen, Rodriguez. You're going to start telling us the truth about who you really are and what you're really doing here. Because if you're connected to the security breach in any way, we're not going to let you put our futures and our careers at risk. Elena looked at each woman in turn, calculating rapidly. Her cover had been carefully constructed over months of preparation, but it was never designed to withstand direct confrontation from intelligent, experienced soldiers who had grown suspicious of her presence. And if I refused to answer your questions? Elena asked. Nicole's smile was cold and professional. Then we take our concerns to Drill Sergeant Thompson and let him know that we suspect one of his trainees is operating under false pretenses. I'm pretty sure he'll be very interested in conducting his own investigation into your background. The ultimatum hung in the air between them. Elena realized that the moment she had been dreading for months had finally arrived. Her carefully maintained cover story was crumbling, and she had to make a choice between maintaining her deception and risking exposure of a classified operation, or revealing enough truth to satisfy their suspicions without compromising national security. Before she could respond, the sound of approaching vehicles cut through the morning air. Military police trucks were pulling up to the training facility, their lights flashing and radios crackling with urgent communications. Armed MPs were beginning to establish a security perimeter around the entire complex. Looks like the security breach is more serious than they initially let on, Amy observed, her attention momentarily diverted from Elena. Rachel nodded grimly. They're treating this place like a crime scene now. That means they think the breach was internal, not external. Elena watched the MPs setting up their operation with the trained eye of someone who had coordinated similar security responses in other locations. She could see tactical patterns and procedural elements that most trainees wouldn't recognize, but her knowledge was becoming increasingly difficult to conceal. Nicole caught her expression of professional interest. You seem to know a lot about military police procedures for someone who's just a trainee, she said suspiciously. Before Elena could formulate a response, a loud voice cut across the training ground. All personnel, report to the main assembly area immediately. This is not a drill. Repeat, all personnel to main assembly immediately. As they walked toward the designated area, Elena's mind raced through possible scenarios and response strategies. The security breach investigation was accelerating beyond her ability to control through misdirection and careful performance. Sooner or later, probably sooner, her true identity would be exposed. The main assembly area had been transformed into what looked like a field interrogation center. Tables were set up with laptop computers and communication equipment. Military police officers were checking identification documents and comparing them against database records. The atmosphere was tense and professional, with the kind of focus intensity that indicated serious criminal investigation. Drill Sergeant Thompson stood at the center of the operation, conferring with a tall man in military police uniform whom Elena didn't recognize. As trainees filed into the assembly area, Thompson's eyes swept across the group with the penetrating gaze of someone looking for specific indicators of guilt or deception. "Listen carefully," Thompson announced as the last trainees took their positions. "The security breach we discovered this morning is more extensive than initially reported. Classified operational data spanning several months has been systematically accessed and copied. This was not a single incident, but rather an ongoing intelligence operation conducted by someone with inside access to this facility." Elena felt her colleagues' eyes turning toward her with growing suspicion. Her months of careful observation and intelligence gathering were about to be viewed through an entirely different lens. The MP officer stepped forward to address the group. "I'm Major Patricia Wells from the Criminal Investigation Division. Over the next several hours, each of you will be interviewed individually about your activities, observations, and any suspicious behavior you may have witnessed during your time at this facility." Major Wells's gaze moved systematically across the assembled trainees, lingering on each face as if memorizing details for later reference. When her eyes met Elena's, there was a moment of recognition that sent a chill down Elena's spine. Wells knew something about her true identity. Additionally, Wells continued, "We'll be conducting comprehensive background checks on all personnel, including reviews of service records, financial histories, and personal associations. Anyone with classified information in their background will be subject to enhanced screening procedures." Rachel leaned slightly toward Elena and whispered, "Looks like your mysterious service record is about to get a lot more scrutiny." Nicole nodded in agreement. "Enhanced screening for classified backgrounds means they're going to dig deep into everything. If you've been hiding something Rodriguez, they're going to find it." Elena maintained her composure, but internally she was running through contingency protocols. Her cover identity had been designed to withstand casual scrutiny, but a full CID investigation would uncover layers of deception that could compromise not just a current assignment, but potentially other ongoing operations. As individual interviews began, Elena watched her fellow trainees being called away one by one. She noticed that the interviews were being conducted in order of suspected priority, with the most suspicious cases being handled first. The fact that she hadn't been called yet suggested that either her cover was holding better than she thought, or Wells was saving her for last for strategic reasons. Amy returned from her interview after about 30 minutes, looking relieved but confused. They asked a lot of questions about relationships between trainees, particularly about anyone who seemed to be asking unusual questions or showing interest in information outside their normal scope of responsibility. Rachel nodded thoughtfully. "Makes sense. An inside job would require someone who could access information without raising immediate suspicions. Someone who belonged here, but was operating with hidden agenda." Elena realized that every detail of her behavior over the past 4 months was being analyzed through the lens of espionage investigation. Her careful questions about security procedures, her interest in facility layouts, her tendency to observe rather than participate in social activities, all of these behaviors that had been necessary for her mission could now be interpreted as evidence of treasonous activity. When Nicole returned from her interview, her expression was thoughtful and calculating. She sat down next to Elena and studied her carefully before speaking. "They asked very specific questions about you, Rodriguez," she said quietly. "About your background, your behavior patterns, your level of knowledge about topics that most trainees wouldn't understand." Elena felt the walls closing around her, but she maintained her calm exterior. "What kind of questions?" "Questions that suggested they already know more about you than they're letting on," Nicole replied. "Major Wells seemed particularly interested in whether I thought you had training or experience beyond what's listed in your official record." Before Elena could respond, a military police officer approached their group. "Rodriguez," he said formally, "Major Wells wants to see you now." As Elena stood up to follow the officer, she could feel the weight of her colleague's stares following her across the assembly area. She knew that by the time she returned from this interview, if she returned at all, the careful balance of her undercover assignment would be irrevocably altered. Major Wells had set up her interview station in what had previously been used as a classroom. The space had been cleared of training materials and furnished with a simple table, 2 chairs, and recording equipment. The sterile environment was designed to be psychologically intimidating, and Elena recognized the tactical setup immediately. "Please have a seat, Lieutenant Rodriguez," Wells said, using Elena's correct rank rather than the trainee designation she had been using for months. Elena felt her carefully constructed cover story evaporate in that single moment. Wells not only knew her true identity, but was choosing to reveal that knowledge in a way that demonstrated complete tactical advantage. "I see you recognize the significance of what I just said," Wells continued, settling into her chair across from Elena. "Shall we dispense with the pretense and have an honest conversation about why you're really here?" Elena considered her options rapidly. Denial was no longer viable, but full disclosure could compromise classified operations and endanger other personnel. She had to find a middle ground that satisfied Wells's requirements without violating her security obligations. "Major," Elena said carefully, "I think you know that I'm not authorized to discuss certain aspects of my assignment without proper clearance verification." Wells smiled grimly. "Lieutenant, I have clearance levels that would surprise you. More importantly, I have specific authorization from your chain of command to conduct this interview. Your handler has already been notified that your cover has been compromised." The revelation that Wells was coordinating with Elena's actual superiors changed the entire dynamic of the situation. This wasn't an interrogation by someone trying to uncover her identity, but rather a debriefing by someone who already knew exactly who she was and what she had been doing. "How long have you known?" Elena asked. "Since the day you arrived," Wells replied. "Your cover identity was solid, but not solid enough to fool someone with my level of access to personnel databases. The question is whether your assignment here is related to the security breach we're investigating." Elena felt a sense of relief mixed with professional frustration. For months of careful undercover work had been conducted under the observation of someone who had known her true identity from the beginning. "My assignment is directly related to your investigation," Elena confirmed. "I've been conducting surveillance of this facility and its personnel based on intelligence suggesting that classified information was being systematically leaked to hostile organizations." Wells nodded as if confirming information she already possessed. "And what conclusions have you reached during your 4 months of observation?" This was the moment Elena had been working toward throughout her entire assignment. She had spent months carefully analyzing behavior patterns, communication methods, and access opportunities to identify the most likely source of security leaks. "I've narrowed the field to 3 primary suspects," Elena said, "but I need additional information about the specific materials that were accessed during the breach to make a definitive identification." Wells pulled out a thick folder and placed it on the table between them. "These are details about what was taken and how the perpetrator accessed the secured systems. Review this information and tell me which of your suspects is most likely responsible." Elena opened the folder and began studying the evidence. The level of system access required for breach, the specific types of information that had been targeted, and the sophisticated methods used to avoid detection all pointed towards someone with advanced technical training and detailed knowledge of facility security procedures. After several minutes of careful analysis, Elena looked up from the documents. "Based on this evidence, I believe Staff Sergeant Nicole Hayes is your primary suspect." Wells leaned back in her chair, her expression revealing nothing about whether Elena's conclusion matched her own investigation. "Explain your reasoning." "Hayes has a technical background to execute this level of system infiltration," Elena began. Her previous assignments included communications intelligence and electronic warfare training. She also has leadership authority that would allow her to access areas and information that other trainees couldn't reach without raising suspicions. Elena paused, organizing her thoughts carefully. "More importantly, she's been asking specific questions about my background and pushing for information that goes beyond casual curiosity. Someone conducting counter-surveillance would exhibit exactly that pattern of behavior. Wells made notes in a small book while Elena spoke. What about the other two suspects you mentioned? Rachel Manning has a physical access and opportunity, but lacks the technical sophistication for this level of operation, Elena replied. Amy Blackwood has shown some suspicious behavioral patterns, but her background doesn't include the specialized training that would be necessary for systematic intelligence gathering. So you believe Hayes has been conducting her own investigation into your presence here? Wells asked. Elena nodded. I think she suspected I wasn't who I claimed to be and started her own intelligence-gathering operation to determine my true purpose. When she realized I might be getting close to identify her as the source of the leaks, she accelerated her timeline and attempted to gather as much information as possible before her cover was blown. Wells closed her notebook and stood up from the table. Lieutenant, your analysis is consistent with the conclusions we've reached through our own investigation. Staff Sergeant Hayes is indeed our primary suspect, and we believe she's been operating under instructions from a foreign intelligence service. Elena felt a surge of professional satisfaction. For months of careful observation and analysis had successfully identified a serious threat to national security. What's the next step? The next step is for you to return to your cover identity and act as if this conversation never happened. Wells replied. We need Hayes to believe that she's still operating undetected, while we gather additional evidence and identify her handlers and contacts. How long do you expect that to take? Elena asked. Wells paused at the door of the interview room. Not long. Hayes is becoming increasingly desperate, and desperate people make mistakes. We just need to be patient and let her expose herself completely. As Elena walked back toward the assembly area, she realized that the most dangerous phase of her assignment was just beginning. Now she had to return her role as an undercover trainee, while being fully aware that one of her colleagues was an active enemy agent who suspected her true identity. The other trainees looked up expectantly as Elena rejoined their group. Their expressions showed a mixture of curiosity and suspicion, clearly hoping for information about what had transpired during her interview. Well, Nicole asked with studied casualness. How did it go? Elena settled into her previous position, carefully controlling her body language and facial expressions. Standard questions about observations and background verification, she said with what she hoped sounded like relieved exhaustion. They're being very thorough, but I don't think they suspect any of us specifically. Rachel nodded sympathetically. The whole situation is making everyone paranoid. It's hard to believe that someone we work with every day could be involved in espionage. People aren't always who they seem to be, Nicole said, her eyes fixed on Elena's face. Sometimes the person you least suspect is the one with the most to hide. Elena met Nicole's gaze steadily. That's true. Trust has to be earned through actions, not just words. Amy shifted uncomfortably in her seat. This whole investigation is going to change the dynamic here. Everyone's going to be suspicious of everyone else. How are we supposed to function as a team when we can't trust each other? We focus on our training and let the investigators do their job, Elena replied. The truth has a way of coming out eventually. Nicole smiled, but there was no warmth in the expression. I couldn't agree more. The truth always comes out, no matter how carefully someone tries to hide it. The verbal sparring continued for several more minutes, with each woman choosing her words carefully while probing for information and reactions. Elena realized that she was now engaged in a complex psychological chess match with someone who was probably as highly trained as she was. As the afternoon wore on, normal training activities resumed under the watchful eyes of the military police. Elena participated in obstacle courses, marksmanship training, and tactical exercises, while maintaining her carefully crafted performance of competent but unremarkable skill. But now she found herself analyzing every interaction with Nicole through the lens of counterintelligence operations. Every question, every suggestion, every casual comment was potentially part of sophisticated information gathering effort designed to confirm or deny suspicions about Elena's true identity. During a break between training exercises, Nicole approached Elena privately. I've been thinking about our conversation this morning, she said conversationally, about background and trust, and how people aren't always who they seem to be. Elena continued adjusting her equipment while listening carefully. It's an interesting topic. I did some additional research into your service record, Nicole continued. Called in a few favors with people I know in personnel management. Your background is even more mysterious than I initially thought. This was exactly the kind of investigation that Elena's cover identity had been designed to discourage, but Nicole's persistence suggested either unusual resourcefulness or access to information systems that most trainees shouldn't be able to reach. I'm not sure what you mean, Elena said carefully. Nicole moved closer, lowering her voice to ensure their conversation remained private. I mean that your service record shows all the right basic information, but none of the supporting details that should exist. It's like someone created a perfect shell of a military career without any of the substance that would normally be attached. Elena realized that Nicole's investigation capabilities were more sophisticated than she had anticipated. Someone with access to detailed personnel databases could potentially uncover inconsistencies that would expose her cover identity. Military records can be complicated, Elena replied, especially for people who've worked in sensitive areas where operational security is a concern. Exactly, Nicole said with a knowing smile. People who work in sensitive areas often have records that are sanitized or compartmentalized to protect ongoing operations. The question is what kind of sensitive area you've been working in, and whether your presence here is related to that work. Before Elena could respond, Drill Sergeant Thompson's voice cut across the training ground. All personnel, fall in for evening briefing. Move it, move it, move it. As the trainees assembled for what had become their daily security briefing, Elena realized that Nicole's suspicions were becoming increasingly dangerous. If Nicole was indeed the source of security leaks, her investigation into Elena's background could potentially compromise other ongoing operations beyond just this facility. Thompson stood before the assembled group with the same intense expression he had worn throughout the crisis. Behind him, Major Wells and several other military police officers maintained their vigilant observation of the trainees. The investigation into security breach is continuing, Thompson announced. We've made significant progress in identifying the methods used to access classified systems, and we're now focusing our efforts on a small number of potential suspects. Elena felt Nicole's eyes on her face, studying her reaction to Thompson's words. She maintained a neutral expression while internally calculating the implications of the statement. Additionally, Thompson continued, we've discovered evidence that the security breach is part of a larger intelligence operation targeting multiple military facilities. This means the stakes are even higher than we initially realized, and our investigation is being coordinated with federal law enforcement agencies. The revelation that the security breach extended beyond their facility changed the entire scope of the investigation. Elena realized that Nicole's activities were part of a broader espionage network, which made her significantly more dangerous than a single rogue operator. After the briefing ended and trainees began moving toward the dining facility, Nicole once again positioned herself next to Elena. Interesting developments, she commented casually. A larger intelligence operation suggests professional coordination rather than individual initiative. It does sound serious, Elena agreed. Nicole nodded thoughtfully. Makes you wonder about the level of planning and resources that would be required for something like that. The kind of operation that would need people with specialized backgrounds and advanced training. Elena recognized that Nicole was continuing to probe for information about her true identity. Every conversation had become a careful dance of questions and responses, with each woman trying to gather intelligence while avoiding exposure of her own secrets. People with that kind of background would probably be very good at maintaining cover identities, Elena observed. Nicole's smile became predatory. They would indeed, but even the best cover identities have weaknesses, especially when subjected to sustained scrutiny by someone who knows what to look for. The threat was becoming increasingly explicit. Nicole was essentially announcing her intention to continue investigating Elena's background until she found the evidence needed to expose her true identity. As they entered the dining facility, Elena realized that she was running out of time. Nicole's investigation was becoming more aggressive and sophisticated, while the military police investigation was moving toward its conclusion. Soon, one way or another, the truth about both women would be revealed. The evening meal proceeded with the same tension that had characterized all social interactions since a security breach investigation began. Trainees sat in small groups, speaking in hushed voices while casting suspicious glances toward other tables. The atmosphere of mutual distrust was exactly what Elena had hoped to avoid when she designed her undercover approach. Nicole continued her subtle interrogation throughout dinner, asking seemingly innocent questions about Elena's opinions on various military topics, while actually probing for indications of knowledge or experience beyond what a typical trainee should possess. "I was reading about different special operations units," Nicole said conversationally. "Fascinating stuff. The level of training and specialization required for units like Delta Force or SEAL Team 6 is incredible. Makes you wonder what kind of person could handle that level of pressure and responsibility." Elena recognized the topic as another attempt to gauge her reaction and potentially extract information about her background. "I imagine it takes a very specific type of individual," she replied carefully. "Someone who could blend in anywhere," Nicole continued. "Someone who could maintain a cover identity for months while conducting complex operations. Someone who could gain the trust of targets while secretly gathering intelligence on their activities." The description was so specific to Elena's actual situation that it couldn't be coincidental. Nicole was essentially announcing that she knew Elena was an undercover operative, while still maintaining enough ambiguity to avoid direct accusations. Before Elena could formulate a response, the dining facility's lighting suddenly dimmed and emergency alarms began sounding throughout the complex. Military police officers immediately moved to secure all entrances, while shouting orders for trainees to remain in their seats. Major Wells's voice came over the facility's communication system. "We have detected unauthorized access to secure communication systems. All personnel remain in current positions until further notice." This is not a drill. Elena felt her pulse quicken as she realized that the investigation had reached its critical phase. Someone had made a desperate attempt to communicate with outside contacts, probably to warn them that the security breach had been discovered and that arrests were imminent. Nicole's expression had changed subtly, showing the kind of controlled tension that Elena recognized as the reaction of a trained operative whose mission had been compromised. For the first time since Elena had known her, Nicole looked genuinely concerned about her situation. "Looks like they're getting close to identifying their suspect," Nicole said quietly, but her voice carried a note of strain that hadn't been there before. Elena nodded, watching carefully as military police officers moved systematically through the dining facility, checking identification and asking specific questions of individual trainees. "Someone's obviously getting desperate. Desperation makes people dangerous," Nicole observed. "When someone realizes they're about to be caught, they might do things they wouldn't normally consider." Elena interpreted the comment as both a general observation and a potential warning. If Nicole was indeed the spy they were hunting, she was essentially announcing that she was prepared to take extreme measures to avoid capture. Military police officers were now moving table by table through the dining facility, conducting what appeared to be targeted interviews with specific individuals. Elena noticed that they were focusing on trainees who had technical backgrounds or access to sensitive information. When the officers reached their table, Elena was surprised to see Major Wells herself approach to conduct the questioning. "Ladies," Wells said formally, "I need to ask each of you about your activities during the past 2 hours. Specifically, I need to know if any of you accessed communication systems or attempted to send messages outside this facility." Each woman answered in turn, providing alibis and explanations for their whereabouts during the relevant time period. When it was Nicole's turn to respond, Elena detected a slight hesitation before she provided her answer. "I was in the recreation area reading military technical manuals," Nicole said. "I can provide the specific titles and page numbers if you need verification." Wells made notes while studying Nicole's face carefully. "What kind of technical manuals?" "Communication systems and electronic warfare procedures," Nicole replied. "I like to stay current on technological developments in military applications." Elena realized that Nicole had just provided information that could potentially be used against her. Admitting to reading about communication systems and electronic warfare during a time when unauthorized access had been detected was either incredibly naive or incredibly bold. Wells finished her questioning and moved on to the next table, But Elena noticed that she whispered something to one of the other military police officers before departing. Within minutes, additional officers had positioned themselves near the exits in what appeared to be preparation for detaining specific individuals. Nicole seemed to sense the changing atmosphere in the room. Her posture became more alert, and her eyes began systematically scanning for potential escape routes. Elena recognized a behavioral pattern of someone preparing for immediate action. "I think I'm going to step outside for some fresh air," Nicole said, beginning to rise from her seat. Before she could stand completely, two military police officers approached their table with weapons drawn. "Staff Sergeant Nicole Hayes," one of the officers announced formally, "you're under arrest for espionage, theft of classified government property, and conspiracy to commit acts harmful to national security." Nicole's carefully maintained facade finally cracked, revealing the cold calculation of a professional intelligence operative whose cover had been blown. Instead of showing surprise or confusion, her expression became focused and dangerous. "I think there's been some mistake," Nicole said calmly, but Elena could see her hands moving subtly toward concealed positions where weapons might be hidden. "No mistake," Major Wells said, approaching from behind with additional officers. "We have recorded evidence of your unauthorized access to classified communication systems, along with intercepted transmissions to known foreign intelligence contacts." Elena realized that the investigation had been building toward this moment for the entire day. Wells and her team had been gathering evidence while allowing Nicole to believe she was still operating undetected. Nicole's eyes moved quickly around the room, calculating odds and distances. Elena could see the moment when Nicole decided that surrender was not an option. With lightning-fast reflexes that revealed her true level of training, Nicole overturned the table between herself and the officers while simultaneously drawing a concealed weapon from her uniform. The dining facility erupted into chaos as trainees scrambled for cover and military police officers shouted commands. Elena's own training took over as she assessed the tactical situation. Nicole was moving toward an emergency exit while using overturned tables and panicked trainees as cover. She was clearly following an escape plan that had been prepared in advance for exactly this situation. But Elena had advantages that Nicole didn't know about. 4 months of observation had given her detailed knowledge of Nicole's capabilities, behavioral patterns, and likely escape routes. More importantly, Elena's true identity gave her access to skills and authority that Nicole couldn't anticipate. As Nicole reached the emergency exit and began working to override the electronic lock, Elena moved to intercept her. She approached from an angle that Nicole's tactical training wouldn't expect, using environmental cover that most people wouldn't recognize as available. "Going somewhere, Staff Sergeant?" Elena said quietly, positioning herself between Nicole and the exit. Nicole spun around, her weapon trained on Elena's center of mass. For the first time, her expression showed genuine surprise. Well, Rodriguez, looks like you're not as helpless as you pretended to be." "People aren't always who they seem to be," Elena replied, echoing Nicole's words from earlier in the day. "You taught me that lesson yourself." Nicole's eyes narrowed as she began to understand the implications of Elena's calm confidence in the face of a trained operative holding a loaded weapon. "Who are you, really?" Elena smiled at the kind of cold professionalism that Nicole would recognize from her own training. "Colonel Elena Rodriguez, Delta Force Operations Command. I've been hunting you for 4 months, and now you're going to answer some questions about your handlers and contacts." The revelation hit Nicole like a physical blow. Her carefully maintained superiority evaporated as she realized that she had been outmaneuvered by someone whose true capabilities far exceeded her own. "A Delta Force colonel," Nicole whispered, her weapon wavering slightly. "You've been undercover this entire time, watching us, analyzing our behavior, waiting for someone to make a mistake. Your mistake was assuming that a small, quiet woman couldn't be dangerous," Elena replied. "The same assumption that let you operate undetected for months was the assumption that ultimately led to your capture." Military police officers had surrounded the emergency exit area, but they maintained their distance while Elena conducted her confrontation with Nicole. They recognized the tactical situation was under control and that Elena had established dominance over the armed suspect. Nicole's training reasserted itself as she calculated her remaining options. She was trapped between Elena and the military police, with no viable escape routes and no backup support. Surrender was her only rational choice, but Elena could see in her eyes that rationality wasn't controlling her decisions. "You might be Delta Force," Nicole said with desperate bravado, "but I'm still the one holding the weapon. That gives me the advantage in this situation." Elena shook her head slowly. "The advantage in this situation belongs to whoever has the better training, the better positioning, and the better understanding of how this is going to end. On all three counts, that would be me." Before Nicole could respond, Elena moved with the fluid precision of someone who had been trained to disarm opponents in close-quarters combat. In less than 2 seconds, Nicole's weapon was on the floor, and Nicole herself was face down with Elena's knee pressed against her spine. "The thing about assumptions," Elena said as military police officers moved in to secure the prisoner, "is that they're usually wrong. You assumed I was weak because I looked harmless. You assumed I was incompetent because I kept a low profile. Most importantly, you assumed you were the most dangerous person in this room." As Nicole was handcuffed and led away, Elena stood up and dusted off her uniform. Around the dining facility, her fellow trainees stared at her with expressions of shock and awe. The quiet, unassuming woman they had dismissed and ridiculed had just demonstrated capabilities that none of them had imagined possible. Major Wells approached with an expression of professional admiration. "Outstanding work, Colonel. Your undercover operation successfully identified and neutralized a serious threat to national security." Elena nodded, but her expression remained serious. "Nicole Hayes was part of a larger intelligence network. We need to identify her handlers and contacts before they realize their operation has been compromised." Wells agreed with a grim nod. "The interrogation process will begin immediately. With your insights from 4 months of observation, we should be able to extract the information we need." As the dining facility was cleared and secured, Elena found herself surrounded by the same women who had spent months questioning her capabilities and belonging. Rachel, Amy, and the others stared at her with expressions that ranged from shock to embarrassment to something approaching fear. Rachel was the first to find her voice. "You're really a Delta Force Colonel?" Elena looked at each woman in turn, seeing their earlier mockery and hostility transformed into stunned recognition of how completely they had misjudged her. "I am." Amy stepped forward, her face flushed with shame. "All those times in the showers, all those comments about you not belonging here, about you being weak." She paused, struggling to find words. "We were insulting one of the most elite soldiers in the American military. You were making assumptions based on appearances," Elena replied calmly. "It's a common mistake, and sometimes it's a useful one for people in my line of work." Rachel shook her head in disbelief. "4 months? You maintained that cover for 4 months while we treated you like you were barely qualified to be here." "The cover was necessary to identify a serious threat to national security," Elena explained. "Your reactions were actually helpful in maintaining the deception. Someone who was being treated with respect and admiration would have drawn more attention from the real spy." The weight of their behavior over the past months was clearly settling on the group. These were professional soldiers who prided themselves on their judgment and tactical awareness, and they had been completely fooled by someone they had dismissed as incompetent. Amy looked down at her hands. "Every insult, every time we questioned your abilities, every time we suggested you should quit the program, was directed at someone who has led combat missions in 3 different theaters, commanded elite special operations teams, and has more combat experience than all of you combined." Elena finished. "But holding grudges isn't productive. You reacted based on the information you had available." Rachel's expression shifted from shame to curiosity. "What's your actual background? Your real service record?" Elena considered how much information she could share without compromising operational security. "Naval Academy, top of my class. Special Forces training at Fort Bragg. Multiple deployments in classified operations throughout the Middle East and Eastern Europe. Selection for Delta Force 5 years ago. Promotion to Colonel 2 years ago." The list of credentials left the women speechless. They were looking at someone whose career achievements far exceeded anything they had imagined possible for someone their age. "The shooting skills we saw during the obstacle course," Amy said slowly, That wasn't luck. Expert marksmanship ratings in multiple weapon systems. Elena confirmed. The underwater navigation, the tactical awareness, the leadership under pressure, all of that was real training showing through despite my attempts to appear average. Rachel sat heavily in one of the chairs that hadn't been overturned during Nicole's arrest. We spent months trying to convince you to quit, telling you that you didn't belong in an elite military program. While I was actually investigating one of you for treason, Elena added, the irony wasn't lost on me. Amy looked around at the other women. No wonder you never responded to our challenges or got defensive about our comments. You knew exactly what you were capable of. Getting into arguments would have drawn attention and potentially compromised the investigation, Elena explained. Someone who was really struggling to keep up would have been more likely to defend themselves aggressively. Major Wells returned to their area with a tablet computer showing preliminary results from Nicole's interrogation. Colonel, we're getting cooperation from the suspect. She's provided names and contact information for her handlers, along with details about the intelligence network she was working for. Elena reviewed the information on the tablet, cross-referencing it with her own observations and suspicions from the past 4 months. This matches the behavioral patterns I documented. She was definitely receiving outside instruction on what information to target and how to avoid detection. The network is larger than we initially suspected. Wells continued. Multiple military installations, defense contractors, and government agencies. This operation has been active for over 2 years. Elena felt a sense of professional satisfaction, mixed with concern about the broader implications. Successfully identifying Nicole was just the beginning of dismantling what appeared to be a sophisticated and extensive espionage operation. What's the timeline for rolling up the rest of the network? Elena asked. Coordinated arrests are beginning within the next 6 hours. Wells replied. Federal agencies are moving simultaneously to prevent suspects from warning each other or destroying evidence. Rachel looked up from her seat. This was really happening right under our noses. We were training alongside an enemy agent for months and never suspected anything. That's exactly what made her dangerous, Elena explained. She was smart enough to maintain her cover while systematically stealing information that could have gotten American soldiers killed in combat. Amy stood up and faced Elena directly. Colonel, I owe you an apology. We all do. The way we treated you, the things we said, the assumptions we made. Elena held up a hand to stop her. Professional soldiers learn from their mistakes and move forward. What matters now is that the threat has been neutralized and valuable intelligence has been gathered. But Rachel persisted. It's not that simple. We spent months undermining and insulting someone who was risking her career and potentially her life to protect national security. That's not something we can just forget about. Elena studied the faces of the women around her, seeing genuine remorse and newfound respect, but also something deeper. They were grappling with the realization that their own judgment and tactical awareness had serious flaws that could be exploited by enemies. You want to learn from this experience? Elena asked. Then remember that assumptions are dangerous in combat situations. The enemy soldier who looks harmless might be the most lethal person on the battlefield. The quiet teammate who keeps to themselves might be gathering intelligence on your weaknesses. Amy nodded soberly. Never judge capabilities based on appearances or initial impressions. And always consider that people around you might be operating with hidden agendas. Elena added, trust is essential for military units, but so is tactical awareness and operational security. Wells approached with another update. Colonel, Nicole Hayes has provided detailed information about her recruitment, training, and operational methods. This intelligence is going to be valuable for counterintelligence operations at other facilities. Elena felt the satisfaction of a mission successfully completed, but she also realized that her undercover assignment was ending. Tomorrow she would return to her actual duties as a Delta Force colonel, leaving behind the carefully constructed identity that had protected her for 4 months. What happens now? Rachel asked, seeming to read Elena's thoughts. Do you go back to your real job? Do you disappear and become someone else's harmless trainee who's actually hunting spies? Elena smiled for the first time since her true identity had been revealed. I go back to doing what I've always done, leading elite soldiers in operations that most people never hear about. The difference is that now I have a better understanding of how espionage operations work and how to identify them. Amy looked thoughtful. Will you stay in touch? I mean, we know your real identity now. That depends on classification levels and operational security requirements. Elena replied honestly. But you've all been cleared at levels that suggest you might encounter similar situations in your own careers. Wells gathered her materials and prepared to leave. Colonel, your debriefing is scheduled for tomorrow morning. After that, you'll be free to return to your regular duties. As Wells departed, Elena found herself alone with the women who had been her colleagues, critics, and unknowing cover for the past 4 months. The dynamic between them had changed completely, but the relationships they had built were still real. For what it's worth, Rachel said quietly, you were a good teammate even when we didn't deserve it. You helped us during training exercises. You never retaliated when we were hostile, and you maintained your professionalism even when we questioned your right to be here. Elena nodded appreciation for the acknowledgement. You're all good soldiers with strong potential for advancement. Don't let this experience make you doubt your abilities or your judgment. Use it to improve both. The conversation was interrupted by Drill Sergeant Thompson entering the dining facility with several other instructors. His expression showed a mixture of professional interest and personal embarrassment as he approached Elena. Colonel Rodriguez, he said formally, I owe you an apology for not recognizing your true qualifications during your time in my program. Elena stood and returned the salute properly. Sergeant Thompson, your program provided excellent cover for my investigation. The training was challenging and professionally conducted. Thompson looked uncomfortable. I should have recognized the signs of advanced training. A soldier with your background shouldn't have been able to hide her capabilities so completely. The ability to blend in and appear unremarkable is actually one of the most important skills for undercover operatives, Elena explained. Your program helped me practice those skills under realistic conditions. One of the other instructors, Staff Sergeant Martinez, stepped forward. Colonel, some of us had suspicions that you were more qualified than your performance suggested, but we assumed you were sandbagging to avoid standing out among your peers. Elena nodded understanding. That was exactly the impression I was trying to create. Someone who was capable but deliberately underperforming to maintain a low profile. Thompson looked around at the overturned furniture and signs of the earlier confrontation. Hayes was one of our most promising trainees. Her leadership scores were consistently high, and her technical knowledge was exceptional, which made her perfect cover for an intelligence operation. Elena replied, someone who excelled would naturally have access to sensitive information and authority over other trainees. No one would question her interest in classified materials or her relationships with people who had access to secure systems. Martinez shook his head grimly. It's disturbing to think that we've been training someone who was actively working against American interests. It's more disturbing to think about how much damage she could have caused if this operation had continued undetected, Elena added. The intelligence she was gathering could have compromised ongoing operations and endangered American lives worldwide. Thompson straightened his posture, shifting into his formal instructor mode. Colonel, would you be willing to conduct a briefing for our staff about operational security and counterintelligence awareness? This experience has highlighted some gaps in our procedures that need be addressed. Elena considered the request. Sharing her expertise could help prevent similar security breaches at other training facilities, but it would also require revealing classified information about intelligence gathering methods and operational procedures. I'll need to clear any briefing through my chain of command, Elena replied. But the concept has merit. Training facilities like this one are natural targets for foreign intelligence services because they provide access to information about military capabilities and personnel. Amy, who had been listening quietly to the conversation between Elena and the instructors, finally spoke up. Colonel, can I ask you something personal? Elena nodded permission. During those months when we were treating you badly, questioning your abilities, suggesting you didn't belong here, how did you really feel about it? Elena considered the question carefully. It touched on aspects of her experience that went beyond professional requirements and into personal territory. Honestly, Elena said, It was sometimes frustrating to be underestimated and dismissed by people whose respect I would have valued under normal circumstances. But it was also useful for maintaining my cover, and it gave me insights into how people react to individuals who don't fit their expectations. Rachel leaned forward with interest. What kind of insights? People tend to dismiss threats that don't match their preconceived notions, Elena explained. A small, quiet woman doesn't fit most people's image of a dangerous operative, so they don't take appropriate precautions. That psychological bias can be exploited by people who understand how to manipulate expectations. Amy nodded thoughtfully. Nicole used the same principle. She fit everyone's image of what a successful soldier should look like, so no one suspected she was working for the other side. Exactly, Elena confirmed. Both of us were using assumptions and stereotypes to our advantage, just for opposite purposes. Thompson checked his watch and looked around at the assembled group. It's been a long day for everyone. Colonel, I assume you'll be departing tomorrow once your debriefing is complete. That's correct, Elena confirmed. I'll be returning to my regular duties with Delta Force Operations Command. Rachel stood up and extended her hand formally. Colonel Rodriguez, it's been an honor serving with you, even if we didn't realize it at the time. I hope our paths cross again under better circumstances. Elena shook her hand, then moved to do the same with Amy and the other women who had been her cover colleagues for 4 months. Despite the deception that had defined their relationship, she had developed genuine respect for their professionalism and dedication. You're all going to be fine soldiers, Elena said. Remember what you've learned here, both about tactical awareness and about not judging people based on appearances. As the group began to disperse, Elena realized that her undercover assignment had given her more than just intelligence about enemy operations. It had provided valuable insights into leadership, teamwork, and the psychology of military units that would serve her well in future assignments. Major Wells returned with final paperwork and instructions for Elena's departure. Colonel, your handler wants to speak with you before you leave. There's apparently another assignment being considered that would utilize the skills you developed during this operation. Elena felt a familiar mixture of anticipation and apprehension. In her line of work, successful completion of one mission usually meant immediate assignment to the next challenge. What kind of assignment? She asked. Wells smiled grimly. The kind that requires someone who can blend in anywhere while hunting people who don't want to be found. Your performance over the past 4 months has impressed some very senior people in the intelligence community. As Elena gathered her few personal belongings and prepared to leave the facility where she had spent 4 months living under false identity, she reflected on the lessons learned and relationships formed during her time as an undercover operative. The women who had dismissed her as weak and unqualified now understood that appearances could be deceiving and that the most dangerous opponents were often those who seemed harmless. The instructors had learned valuable lessons about operational security and the importance of counterintelligence awareness in training environments. Most importantly, Elena had proven to herself and her superiors that she could successfully maintain deep cover for extended periods while conducting complex investigations in hostile environments. These skills would be invaluable in future assignments where American interests were threatened by sophisticated adversaries. The next morning, as Elena prepared to leave Fort Benning and return to her life as Colonel Rodriguez of Delta Force, she took one last look around the facility that had been her home and cover for 4 months. The transformation from despised trainee to respected commander had been dramatic, but the real transformation had been in her understanding of how to blend strength with subtlety, authority with humility, and effectiveness with invisibility. Rachel, Amy, and several other women were waiting near the departure area as Elena loaded her gear into the military transport vehicle. Their expressions showed a mixture of respect, embarrassment, and genuine friendship that had developed despite the deceptive circumstances of their relationship. Colonel, Rachel said as Elena prepared to board the vehicle, thank you for showing us that being underestimated can be a powerful advantage if you know how to use it properly. Elena paused at the vehicle door. And thank you for helping me maintain my cover, even if you didn't know you were doing it. Your reactions were essential to the success of this operation. Amy stepped forward with a final observation. We learned that the person who seems weakest might actually be the strongest, and the person who stays quiet might be the most dangerous. Those are lessons we'll never forget. Elena smiled with genuine warmth. Those are lessons that could save your lives someday. Use them well. As the transport vehicle pulled away from Fort Benning, Elena watched the training facility disappear in the rear window. 4 months of careful deception had successfully identified and neutralized a serious threat to national security, while teaching valuable lessons about assumption, perception, and the true nature of strength. The quiet, unassuming trainee who had been mocked in the showers was returning to her real life as one of America's most elite warriors. But she was taken with her new insights into the psychology of deception and the power of being underestimated by those who judge based on appearances rather than capabilities. In the intelligence community, successful operatives were those who could become invisible while hiding in plain sight. Elena Rodriguez had proven that she was a master of that essential skill, and her superiors were already planning assignments that would put those abilities to use in protecting American interests around the world. The women she left behind at Fort Benning would continue their training with a new understanding of how dangerous assumptions could be and how the most formidable opponents were often those who looked least threatening. They had learned firsthand that in the world of elite military operations, nothing was ever exactly as it appeared, and the person standing next to you might be someone entirely different from who they claimed to be. As Elena settled back for the journey to her next assignment, she reflected on the perfect irony of her undercover mission. The same women who had spent months telling her she didn't belong in an elite military program had unknowingly been training alongside someone who had already achieved the highest levels of military excellence. Their mockery had provided perfect cover for one of the most successful counterintelligence operations in recent military history. The quiet trainee they had dismissed was actually their commander. The weakness they had perceived was actually strength in disguise. And the woman they thought didn't belong had been exactly where she needed to be all along.